Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this week's Mortgage Minute. My name is Art Alvarez with MortgageWorks, where we have the answers, and they're on the house. Coming to you from Palm Springs in the greater Coachella Valley area. For those of you in Southern California, as you know, we've been under sort of this heat dome now for, seems like better part of a month. But I see next week we'll get some relief out here in the desert. We'll actually be back down into the 80s, which that's a nice, comfortable temperature, and is more seasonal than the high 90s and 100 plus that we've been experiencing for the last couple of weeks. And it's an exciting week in the sports world for a couple of reasons. One, of course, is we're now going into the second weekend for March Madness, the round of 16 teams. From there, heading to the Elite Eight, Final Four, and, of course, then the college basketball championship. So that's pretty exciting. Of course, my bracket, like everybody else's, got busted almost immediately. Although I'm still pushing for Arizona to go all the way. So we'll see what happens there. And then the other thing, of course, as you all know, I'm a big baseball fan. It's opening day week in Major League Baseball. All the teams have a different opening day, starting with last night. It was New York Yankees and the Giants. The start of the year, you're always optimistic. Even my lowly Angels, who haven't been in a World Series situation for going on 24 years, and I was there for Game 6 and 7. But start of the year, you try to be optimistic and hopeful that this year will be different. So I'm definitely hoping that for the Angels. I did like the fact they beat their crosstown rival, the Dodgers, here a couple of days ago in a preseason game. And the Angels are actually playing right now. And what was really exciting to see, I just checked the score online, Mike Trout starting center fielder, and first at bat he walked and then stole a base. So that's telling me his wheels may be back in shape, and hopefully he can stay that way and complete a full year. We can certainly hope. So with that, let's go ahead and get into what's going on in the markets. First thing we like to do is show you our rate grid. The rate grid, I did update it this morning. Unfortunately, rates are still trending on the high side. The conforming loans in the fives is gone, at least temporarily. I think it is going to be temporarily. So now we're in the low sixes, 6.25 for conforming conventional. FHA VA still in the fives, but now rather than the low to mid fives, it's 5.75 as of today. 15-year loans still in the mid fives, 5 5/8. And those jumbo loans aren't too terribly bad, 6.25 on a 30-year fixed and 6 on a 7-year fixed. So again, disappointing. Rates are up about 3/8 to 0.5% in the past month. And of course, it's all about the Mideast and all the turmoil there and so forth. Jeff's going to pull up the 10-year Treasury bond chart. This is a 5-day chart. And yeah, unfortunately, since last Friday, you can see the yield's been elevated all week, and now touching for the second time this week, going over 4.40. And then again, remember, a month ago, the 10-year Treasury yield was about 4. So, 0.4 in rate. That's, again, why we're in that 3/8 to 0.5% increase in most mortgage programs. But, that being said, I don't think it's the end of the world. I think people need to kind of keep this in perspective. And let me go ahead and have Jeff pull up the next slide, and we'll talk about what's involved in making the markets move this way. Well, of course, number one, economic data, virtually nil this week, virtually nothing in terms of tangible, important data that would affect, the stock market and the bond market. So very, very light calendar in that respect. Of course, you do know also last week the Fed held steady on the Fed funds rate, second time this year. They held in January, and then now they've held again this month in March. So no improvement in the Fed funds rate. The Fed is pointing to a wobbly labor market, slowing growth, and the PCE, the Personal Consumption Expenditures Index, a little bit of a twister there. That's the Fed's favorite inflation target. It's still stubbornly above 2%, and it's hovering around the high twos, 2.8, 2.9, 3%. So it's been kind of stuck there. And so for all those reasons, the Fed felt it was not warranted to lower the Fed funds rate. I tend to think, wobbly labor market, just because we went from 4.13% unemployment to 4.43 to 4.44, that's wobbly. I'm not sure I would buy that. Growth, yeah, maybe not as robust as expected, but certainly hasn't been, like a net negative growth so far. So, in any event, who knows? The next point, though, is keep in mind, come May, we're going to have a new Fed chair, Chair Warsh, and there is a pretty widespread expectations that he's going to be much more friendly to lowering the Fed funds rate. And so we'll see if that plays out. Again, we'll see what happens there in May. And again, you're fretting about mortgage rates. They're up. The media is, of course, talking up the negative news. Again, I always say try to ignore the headlines. I want you to know we've been here before. And, of course, I show you some date periods within the last year, March to May of 2025. We went from 4.4 to 4.6% on the yield. That's actually higher than it is now. July to August 2025. The 10-year yield was running from 4.3 to 4.5. And then, of course, since September, it's been trending lower. I've been talking about that all year, trending lower where it's been in a range of 4 to 4.25. So, yes, we are busted through that 4.25 that we've been, kind of seeing as the limit since last fall. But you got to keep this in perspective. I do believe this is temporary. This isn't, use a phrase we use to describe the pandemic conditions. This is artificial. There's, from an economic data standpoint, treasury yields should not be this elevated. They just should not be. So obviously it's the external shock of international events that's causing the problem. So from that perspective, I would urge being patient and don't consider this the end of the world, and realize that, in fact, this can provide some opportunities, which is what we're going to get into next. So what we're going to talk about is having to do, as the slide here shows, more choices, less pressure, and the fact that the buyer's market has arrived. And so I want to get into that a little bit and give you some, basically some talking points, hit on some numbers that I think hopefully will persuade you, if you're a prospective buyer, that you shouldn't be waiting. You should actually take this negative news as actually good news, in the sense that it provides you an opportunity to maybe go out there and pursue getting a home when so many others are thinking it's a bad time and continue to want to wait. And one of the things that I read an article here recently where this really kind of bore true, it was an article about we have now hit a record gap in terms of number of sellers and number of buyers in the marketplace. Let me give you a couple of numbers. There are now, and this is a national number, there are now nearly 630,000 more sellers than buyers as of February of 2026. That's the widest gap in Redfin records, and a sign that negotiating power has finally shifted more to those who are active in the market as prospective buyers. Redfin estimated there are now nationally 46% more sellers, up from 29% just a year ago. So again, now we have 46% more sellers currently, when a year ago we had 29% more sellers. So a big jump there. So with those kind of numbers, what does that mean? Well, as the headline here shows, it means buyers are gaining more leverage. And so what does that tell you? Well, gaining leverage, of course, is an environment where you as a buyer now are not going to be in a situation where you've got to feel rushed into, just trying to make an offer, maybe at full price, maybe going over. You have more leverage now. You can, as it shows here, you're gaining negotiating power. You haven't had that until recently. Homes are staying on the market longer. There's less competition compared to recent years. Now, I'm saying less competition as a buyer. Sellers have competition. There's more houses now on the market for sale, as I just pointed out with those other gap data points. When you have that many more sellers than buyers, that means those sellers are facing fierce competition, but you as a buyer, you're now facing less competition compared to just recent years. Remember in the pandemic, when if you wanted to buy a home, you had to go 20 grand over list price and waive the home inspection. You may even make the offer sight unseen and seeing the house yourself, and then you're competing with 18 offers. That's all gone away. And what that means is, as a prospective buyer, you have now less competition compared to recent years, and you should consider that as a plus, net plus positive, not a negative. The next point I would want to show you is what's changing. Well, again, more inventory. Definitely more inventory. We're just about back to a normal market in terms of normal listing inventory. A normal market historically has always been considered about a 6-month supply of listings based on the current sales rate. We're getting pretty darn close to that in most markets. Price reductions are becoming much more common. When I get on the MLS, that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing more red arrows downward on a listing that's been active for a while, where there's been a downward adjustment in the price. And so as a consequence, as the third bullet point points out, there are more price reductions. They're becoming more common, much more common than we saw, again, certainly much more so than a couple of years ago. And now concessions are now in the conversation. We're talking concessions for closing costs, for buy downs, or for a combination of the two. Those are definitely, that phenomenon, that activity, that strategy is now much more common. The next thing to note, why does this matter? Well, you as a buyer, you have more choices. You have less pressure to overbid. The point here is you have more choices. You have more choices of inventory, more choices of homes for sale. You have less urgency, less pressure to overbid. You have, because of that, by the way, you have more time. You may not feel like you have to be in such a rush to hurry up and find a home and make an offer before somebody else does. It's apparent in the current environment, you have more time. That means less pressure. That allows you to think more clearly, more rationally, and I would say more strategically. And as a consequence, you have an opportunity to structure better deals. That's where we can come in. That's what I try to do on every request I get to pre-qualify a buyer for a real estate agent or for a home builder. Now, on the home builder side, in most cases, we're already working with concessions that are already built into the offer being made to the public on those brand new homes. I've argued for years that I would like to see the resale markets, those sellers and those listing agents, use that strategy more directly and more often as part of your overall effort to get that home sold. So you have an opportunity to structure better deals. We can be a major resource for you to help you in that particular area. And as I point out in that last bullet point, and I said earlier, in this environment, you have more time to make your decisions. You don't have to feel as rushed. And of course, you can get a sense on a particular listing if it's a really good home, really well, very good condition, maybe priced very well. You may get a sense that, yeah, maybe that one you do have to rush a little bit. But I'm telling you, overall, you've got a lot less of that pressure cooker situation we had during the pandemic. And that is all good things, all positive things for you as a prospective buyer. So now we'll go to the next slide. And we're going to continue the conversation here about gaining leverage. So what is the opportunity window all about? Because right now you have an opportunity window. And the reason I like to describe it as a window is, what would you guess? Well, windows can close. So you have to be aware of, when is the window open? And I think right now the window's open. But you got to realize it may not continue to be that way forever. There's going to come a time when that window is going to close. So your job, if you realize you've got the right conditions to be more strategically able to make a deal happen, you've got to take into account you have a window, and don't hesitate to grab or go through that window and try to make something happen. So in the current market, we do have an imbalance. I would argue it's probably going to be temporary. Yes, we have a lot more sellers than buyers. Why is that? Well, rates, recently, very recently, last month have gone up. But even before that, we were, again, those numbers, the gap between sellers and buyers I gave you was from February, when rates were actually pretty good. So that underscores the fact that a couple things. With sellers, we're now seeing a little bit less of the lockup effect. When you have that many more sellers than buyers just 2 months ago, when rates were still relatively attractive. The media was talking about we were now getting close to or under 6%. Well, the reason you have more sellers than buyers, despite relatively good rates, is we're finally starting to see some of these sellers with low rates on their existing mortgage are, for whatever reason, now more often deciding to sell anyway. And there could be a variety of reasons for that we don't need to get into. But the point is, we're seeing the data suggest that that's starting to happen. And when that starts to happen, that's what's creating the additional inventory. And if most of those buyers out there are still spooked and want to keep waiting, then those of you who see this opportunity, and if you avoid the groupthink, I would call it, the madness of crowds where you just kind of go with the flow of the headlines that are so negative, as a buyer, take advantage of this opportunity to strike while the iron is hot, as they would say, because so many of your other potential competition, those other prospective buyers, are still stuck in the doldrums of, oh, I think I've got to wait. And the problem, and the reason why I say it's a window, excuse me, is that this leverage opportunity is probably going to shrink. When is it going to shrink? Well, guess what? With the increase in rates we just had the last month, when this finally blows over, and I still think it will, I'm not ready to give up on that yet, rates should probably drop back down pretty quickly and significantly. Well, what that's going to do is potentially start closing that window. Because if, again, we start to see those rates come down and maybe get through that 6% barrier again, then if the media talks that up, that could push more of the buyers back into the market. And that means your leverage as an existing prospective buyer is going to shrink, and you may lose that opportunity. So that's why, as the last bullet point mentions, act now. Acting now is a strategic advantage. Don't get caught up in all the negative news. Realize that with all these conditions that I'm pointing out, put all that together, that's a recipe for maybe making a terrific deal on the purchase of a home if you get together with your agent, get together with your lender, somebody like us. If you don't have a lender, I know a good one, as I like to say. We can help you with this. We are very good at helping you strategically put an offer together and take advantage of these conditions and get some real significant dollars from that seller to accomplish what you need to accomplish to get your financing as good as it can be. And then the next part of that, and as Jeff just put on the screen here, does this timing or window also being driven by springtime buyers buying? Yeah, I think this is a question from our audience. I would say yes to some degree. It's said that generally speaking, in most markets, the springtime does tend to be a period of time where activity tends to kick up. But of course, again, these current events, this last month or so, I think could disrupt what is otherwise a fairly typical seasonal pattern. So I think it's been disruptive to maybe cause, especially on the buyer side, more anxiety and a reason to pause and feel like, hey, things are unsettled and we need to wait a while. So again, when you consider that historically, seasonally, springtime is always sort of the peak of activity for the year, this year's a little different, particularly with these international situations, the tension involved, the war, so forth. That disrupts the normal seasonality of the uptick in the springtime buying. Again, that means as a prospective buyer, what better time to jump in when everybody else is pausing because they're concerned about what's going on. Now, of course, you've got to evaluate your own situation. You got to feel comfortable that if you're employed, your job's in good standing, you don't feel like there's any risk you're going to lose your income stream and so forth. But if you feel you're financially positioned well, take this opportunity, this disruption in the springtime buying, get in there and make the deal while you can, and you're going to find less competition and more time to put together a really good offer and maybe walk away with, again, a very terrific deal in the purchase of a home. So the other thing on this particular page, what we want to cover with you is what are smart buyer moves. Well, again, negotiate closing costs, ask for rate buydowns, explore flexible loan options. We've talked in the last couple of weeks. We think a very good option, particularly for first-time home buyers, even though you don't have to be a first-time home buyer, is the FHA 5/1 ARM. It is the best ARM loan on the market, provides great opportunities, a very low rate fixed for 5 years. You're going to, with a 1% annual cap, you'll never be more than current market after 7 years. And of course, you can do permanent rate buy downs off of a 5-1 arm. And that would mean if you get a decent seller concession as a credit, you could potentially get that 5-year arm with a start rate below 4%. And you get to qualify at that below 4%, say 3 7/8. That can help with your debt ratio if you're tight on qualifying. So that's an example of a loan option to explore. And here in the Coachella Valley, that basically means if you're looking for a home anywhere in the 700 to 720 range, FHA could be a great option. Again, you don't have to be a first-time home buyer. Put 3.5% down, get an FHA arm, ask for a seller credit, boom, you've got a 5-year fix at 3 7/8. And then in year 4, you're not going to be higher than 4 7/8. Year 5, in year 6, you're not going to be higher than 4 7/8. Year 7, not higher than 5 7/8, which is right where the current market is now, basically. So that is a great option, not well known, and we can, of course, help you with that. And then again, focus on long-term strategy, not just the rate. Remember what we say about a 30-year mortgage. Warren Buffett says it's the greatest deal ever in terms of a loan. And he's right. Where else can you get a loan that you can do, that you can get the payment spread out over that long at that low of a rate, even in the 6s? That is a very, very good deal. And when you do that, you're capping in your maximum rate, and then you have the opportunity to refi. That's why he always called it a one-sided bet. He's absolutely right. So you got to focus on the long-term strategy, not just the rate. Take advantage of the rates where they're at, get a seller concession to get them lower, and then realize you've got that refinance window. The refinance process in the mortgage industry is now very efficient. It's pretty easy to do. And so don't let current rate bog you down too much. Take advantage of what's there. We can help you with that. And then realize you've got that refinance opportunity in your back pocket, and you can strike when the time is right. And of course, we can help you with that too. We have another question here on the screen. Can a co-buying situation qualify for the 5-1 arm? Absolutely. We've talked before in the last couple of weeks about, your first-time home buyer. You're young, maybe you're in your late 20s, early 30s. You don't want to be that person who's 40 years old when they buy their first home. How can you get into the market earlier? Buy with a trusted friend, or maybe a relative, brother, sister, or 2 sisters, or 2 brothers. Buy with a trusted friend. Yes, you can use a 5-1 arm as a loan type for a co-buying situation. I think we mentioned in the past shows, we've talked about like a $600,000 purchase price. That's about the median price of a home in the Coachella Valley. You could use a FHA 5-1 arm, 3.5% down payment. It's about 21 grand. You split that in 2. That's 10,500 each. Maybe you request a seller credit on when you offer the full 600. Maybe you get 25 grand. We can then turn around and use that to permanently buy down that rate on the 5-1 arm, where you could maybe get a start rate at 3 7/8. Well, guess what? You take the principal and interest on that, even with the FHA mortgage insurance, split it in 2. Well, gee, these 2 buyers, these 2 co-buyers, they can end up each paying maybe around $1,900, $2,000 a month each, which is a lot better for rent in most places, including here in the Valley. A 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment is probably going to cost you, $2,500 a month. And we demonstrated a week or 2 ago a listing right here locally in Cathedral City, a 2,300 square foot house with 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, listed at $599. A 5-1 arm, using the strategy I just described, would be a great way to get into that home ownership and not continue to wait. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. And so, yeah, very good question. And yes, we can definitely help you with that. So that we'll go ahead and talk about common mistakes. So this is, I felt necessary to cover because I think there are still some common mistakes. And, Jeff's going to pull up the list. Common mistakes are waiting for lower rates, waiting for lower prices. And what's the risk? You're missing the window of leverage. Folks, those of you who are still waiting for lower rates or prices, you're stuck in yesterday. And worst case, you're stuck in yesterday a couple of years ago during the pandemic. Understand that the pandemic was an artificial situation. It was not indicative of a normal market. In my 45 years, I had never originated mortgages at 2%. We had never seen that before. The pandemic was a 100-year event. And to support our national economy that was shut down, the Federal Reserve pumped huge amounts of money into the money supply to prop up the economy. The byproduct of that drove rates to virtually zero. And so, yes, it was a frothy time. Rates were extremely low. It made homeownership extremely affordable, but it also drove prices through the roof. I mean, home prices virtually doubled between 2019 before the pandemic to now. And so that's, some of the negative byproduct of what was otherwise a very frothy time. But there are folks out there, prospective buyers, or maybe those who bought a home during that period and they have that 2.5% rate, who are still stuck waiting for lower rates and lower prices, meaning they're waiting for those lower rates and lower prices, from a couple of years ago when the environment was artificial. It wasn't real. It was a perfect example of something that was temporary, and it's gone, and it's not coming back. We are not going to see those conditions, certainly not in my lifetime. Of course, I'm an older guy, but I would say in most adults' lifetime, we are not going to see those conditions again. And so if you're waiting for that, if you're waiting for under 3, if you're waiting for home prices to drop by 40% or 30% or 20% or 15%, stop waiting, because you've taken on the risk. As it shows, you're missing the window of leverage. The other thing to keep in mind in terms of common mistakes is the fact that in fact, here, let me find it for you. The key takeaway is this is a strategy market, not a timing market. Again, you can't time the market, but there's a lot of people out there who still think they can. And I don't want to just be sort of overemphasize the point, but don't try to time things. Strategize with the conditions as they currently are. And we can show you, we do this every day. I'm closing another purchase loan next week, and it's the same situation. We pre-qualified the buyer, talked to him about what kind of offer he was going to make, decided that they wanted to offer below list. We talked to them about making an offer where they would offer closer to list price but ask for a concession. They gave it a try. It worked, and now they're using that money toward their loan directly. It's improving their overall loan package. And again, that's taking advantage of current situation, and then they're in a well positioned to then refinance later when things do finally settle down. And so the point here in the second bullet point, opportunities do exist if you're prepared. And remember what we said earlier with John Wooden's quote: when opportunity presents itself, it's too late to prepare. So you want to prepare now. You want to get pre-qualified. You want to find out what you truly can buy. You want to go as far as getting pre-approved, getting formally underwritten. So you just need to find the property, get an appraisal and a title report, and you can close. So that's a key takeaway. If you're missing that window of leverage, you got to think of this as a strategy market and understand that there are opportunities for a buyer if you prepare, and then we can help you do that. And then the last point, what to do next. As I just mentioned, get pre-qualified. And I would say take it a step further, get pre-approved. That's the best way to prepare so that you can make an offer quickly and be able to offer to close quickly. And you're going to have a much better offer when compared to others if you do have some competition on a particular home. Build the buying strategy. Have a strategy in mind before you start seriously looking for homes. And of course, yes, when we do the pre-qual, in most cases, we're going to be getting that request from an agent before they've really gotten well into searching for a home. That's where I tend to want to bring that up and say, what's your strategy? And can we talk about that? Are you focusing on trying to get a deal and offer below list price? Have you thought about getting a seller concession, using it a different way? So I basically try to prompt that conversation out of the inquiry I'm getting from a prospective borrower or their agent or both, to at least give them some other alternatives, some food for thought, about the fact that there are more than just one or two ways to be able to make an offer, an effective offer, where you can take advantage of your buyer's leverage and get some concessions that can greatly help you in getting into that home ownership situation. And so then for the last bullet point here on the common mistakes, call me. You got my number right there, 760-969-5023. That's my office number. You can call my cell, 714-612-9035, or drop me an email at art@mwloan.com, and let's have a conversation. Be happy to talk strategy with you, give you some numbers, no obligation. We don't even have to get into making you apply for a loan or pulling your credit. If you have a pretty good idea what your credit score is, just let me know. We can have that conversation about what kind of price level and property type you're looking at, what your down payment is that you have available, and then let me help strategize with you and your agent, and that way you can take advantage of these conditions. It is more of a buyer's market. It is an opportunity. It is a window. That window will not stay open forever, so don't hesitate. Jump through that window now. Get into home ownership and wealth creation, and you'll be happy you did. So that concludes our Mortgage Minute for today. I want to thank you for listening and watching the Mortgage Minute. My name is Art Alvarez at MortgageWorks, where we have the answers and they're on the house. Enjoy this weekend. If you're a basketball fan, of course, enjoy that second round of March Madness. And, of course, on the other hand, if you're a baseball fan, great time, early spring, opening day week. Looking forward to my Angels having a successful year. All I can do is hope, right? We'll see what happens. Again, have a good weekend. We'll see you next week on the next edition of the Mortgage Minute. So long. Take care.